Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. Today I'm going to talk about AlphaDestiny. He did a video, and I want to talk about it a little bit because I think he's getting close to grasping it. This kid is finally almost getting it, but he's not quite there. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And I think he kind of got into this whole topic of strength coaches and people who are in the strength world, like me, who are biased towards carryover. He's trying to talk about the difference between exercises that have carryover to your competitive list versus ones that just put size on you. And it's like, Alex, you need to get up to speed with the terminology. There's actual names for that. It's not called carryover versus exercises that don't have carryover. Let me explain how this works. We all have primary exercises, right? And since we're talking about progressive overload, even for hypertrophy, even if your goal is to just get jacked and you don't care about anything else, you damn well better have primary exercises, because you mentioned in there that, hey, as long as you're getting bigger and stronger, as long as you're getting a lot stronger on this one big exercise, the muscles involved are going to grow. That's true. That's true. I'm going to agree with that. He's right. But we all have primary exercises. I consider right now the pull-up to be, well, almost a primary exercise for me. It would normally fall into the category of an accessory lift. That's what we would call it, right? An accessory lift. Because it doesn't have a movement pattern carryover to a competition lift, but it does build a lot of the stabilizers. It does have an indirect carryover in terms of hypertrophy, right? It has a different form of carryover. It's not the carryover we're thinking of, because that's the point that he doesn't get. All exercises should have carryover. If an exercise puts muscle on a muscle that is a primary mover in a lift that you're talking about as a primary movement, it will have carryover. But the confusion has to do with what we're thinking of as movement pattern carryover versus hypertrophy carryover. So let's go back to the terminology. For a power lifter, the big three is the primary lifts, right? That is the primary lifts. For someone else, it might not be, because you might not be a power lifter per se. But that's their primary exercises, a squat, bench, and deadlift for a raw power lifter, right? Accessory movements versus assistance exercises. Assistance exercises have direct carryover. People say, well, what do you mean? What are assistance exercises? Okay, exercises that use a very similar movement pattern. So for the bench press, like let's say your competition bench is your wide grip bench, the closed grip bench. How about the floor press, right? Perfect examples. They're very, very similar exercises. All the same muscles are involved, same primary movers. And the movement pattern and bar path is very similar. Therefore, they have some carryover. Right? Should be common sense there. Those are assistance movements. They're assistance exercises for the bench press because they're very similar exercises. They're very close. They're not the same exercise, but they're pretty similar. So there is some movement pattern carryover, and there's same muscles involved. A board press for an equipped power lifter, well, some raw guys. The board press is an assistance movement. The slingshot bench is an assistance movement. How about for deadlifting? Any other form of deadlift. So if you're a conventional puller, the sumo is actually an assistance movement. If you're a sumo puller, the conventional is an assistance movement. About the stiff leg deadlift, yeah, that could count. About a below the knee rack pull, yeah, it's an assistance movement. How about a deficit deadlift? It's assistance movement. Very similar exercise. Same thing, we can get over to squats. You guys get the idea. You get the idea. An accessory movement is a movement that doesn't share the movement pattern, but is there to either bring up a muscle that is a possible weak link in the exercise, or to create more stability and injury prevention. Your rear delts used in any of the big three? No. So are face pulls and rear delt work? Are they fall into the area of injury prevention, right? You want to stabilize the shoulder joint more by having a stronger posterior delt to match the anterior delt. That is an accessory movement. Go back to the pull-up. The pull-up is an accessory movement. It makes sense now? Accessory movements. They add muscle where you need them, but they're movement patterns that you do not share with your primary exercises. Now, here's the problem we have with that. I'm going to say that carryover is everything. Carryover is everything because we all have primary exercises we use to put on size. Now, Alex can deny that he uses the bench press or the weighted pull-up to put on size, but he does. Those are on his list of, those are some of his primary exercises. So anything that you do that adds muscle to those, that has carryover, is beneficial. If you're using, let's say you've picked 5 or 6 exercises that you know if you get as strong as possible on those 5 or 6 exercises, let's throw competition out the window. Let's go to the point that we know based on study after study after study, size is strength. All right, size is strength for drug-free lifters. You cannot separate the two in the individual. You cannot. People need to get that out of their heads. So let's assume that you're not talking about just the big 3. You are trying to get a maximum level of jactitude, and you've decided that there are 5 exercises that you want to use to get there, right? And here's my big 5 that I tell people. Squat, bench, deadlift, that's fine, or close variations. They don't have to be those exact lifts. You know, you want to use a weighted dip instead of a bench press, that's fine. You want to use a front squat instead of a back squat, okay, maybe. Now, you see where I'm going there? You want to use a deficit deadlift instead of a normal, okay, that's fine. Maybe even a power clean, all right, I might accept that. And then the standing press and weighted pull-up of some type. I don't care whether it's a chin-up, regular pull-up, hammer grip, neutral grip pull-up, right? Those are my big 5. And I'll tell you guys, if you get as strong as possible and build your work capacity and strength on those 5 exercises, you're going to reach a pretty much close to a maximum level of jactitude. You're not going to have any muscles that are undeveloped. Now, you could argue, well, maybe my side delt needs more. Okay, maybe your bicep needs a little more. Okay, fine. Maybe your hamstring. So it's going to depend on the person. That's fine. But you're going to be pretty big and pretty well developed if you get strong on those 5. Any other exercise that you're doing that has carryover to those is what you should be doing. And the problem with some of the examples he gave is that a lot of them don't work by themselves. And I have a problem with the fact that he threw in like the above-the-knee rack pull. He's one of the only people who thinks the above-the-knee rack pull actually builds big traps. Tons of guys with bigger traps than him don't do it. He got next to Omar. Omar had bigger traps, just as big, if not bigger traps than him, doesn't do above-the-knee rack pulls. They don't do shit. Every expert who hears him say that, and I mean real coaches and experts and people who are researchers in the field, advanced degrees, coach athletes, are laughing every time he says that silly shit. It's not based on reality. They're not that great of a trap exercise. He does other exercises that are better for the traps. But so he throws in the above the knee rack pull. Well, no, that is not a maximum hypertrophy exercise. That's a terrible hypertrophy exercise. Multiple experts have come out and said that and laughed about that. It's not a bodybuilding movement. It's a silly ass movement that's going to put less muscle on you than most of the other stuff you're doing. A barbell row is going to put more muscle on you. A weighted pull-up, a deadlift, an overhead press, a standing press. Those will all put more muscle on you than these silly ass above the knee rack pulls if you're training all of them to close to your maximum recoverable volume per unit of time. They will. They will. That shouldn't even be subject to debate. So stuff like that is where I digress. Whereas if he says, okay, you get as strong as possible on a pull-up, is it going to put a lot of muscle on you? Yes, it will. Is it one of the competitive lifts in powerlifting or Olympic lifting or strength lifting? No. But it'll put a hell of a lot of size on your upper body. It's fantastic exercise. I would agree with that. But a lot of us treat it as a primary exercise. And therefore, your assistance work needs to have carryover to it. Because that's where you're getting your size from. And that's the problem with the other thing when he mentioned the tricep extensions. The problem is the example he gave is unrealistic. Isolation type movements, when you look at it, and coaches have said this repeatedly over the years, isolation movements are not trainable. In other words, the strength gains that you're generally seeing on an isolation movement are coming from your compound movements. They're not coming from doing the isolation movement. That's the problem. In other words, your bench press is what's giving you the strength on your press downs, not the other way around. Now, are the press downs adding workload and volume behind to possibly, for some people, add more tricep size? Yes. But if you didn't bench press, right, you didn't do any sort of pressing, no sort of weighted dips, and you tried to just use tricep extensions to build your triceps, you're going to hit a sticking point probably after about 6 to 8 weeks, and you're not going to progress on that exercise anymore. If it doesn't have a compound movement to feed it, to make it stronger, it generally stalls out and it's not trainable. It's going to put some size on you for a little while, but they don't work even as primary exercises. So when he starts talking about, oh, if you get to where you can press the entire triceps stack or whatever for 10 or 20 reps, do you think you're going to do that without doing any compound movements? Do you really think you can do that with a tricep extension? If I were to take a novice right now who can only do 20 pounds on that tricep extension, press down, and you honestly think that in 2 years, if the only tricep work he does is the press down, that he's ever going to get to the full stack, it's not going to work. He's going to have to use a compound movement to feed it. You don't make long-term strength gains on those sort of exercises, and coaches have noticed this. This has been found by coaches and talked about. It doesn't actually work. So an example like that, no, that's just an accessory movement that you're adding in for more volume for a body part to hopefully add more workload to put a little more size on it. But if you have recovery to spare, you should probably be doing a weighted dip or a closed grip bench press or something else, right? Then he gave the example of going over talking about partials. You know, when we're talking about strength, you're right. Any big exercise is going to put muscle on you. But when you start doing partials and you're just doing board presses and other stuff, you're going to gain muscle, but you're going to gain less muscle than if you had done a full range of motion exercise. Again, this has been studied. This has been researched. His premise is good, but then he starts throwing in exercises that are going to give you less muscle. Now, doesn't mean people don't gain muscle on them, but if you're trying to maximize size, why in the hell would you do partial exercises when every expert, every coach who studies this, every researcher in the field who cares about hypertrophy has got data showing that partials, when you start trimming a range of motion down further, give less total hypertrophy. You don't gain as much muscle from it. So he started off in the right direction, but then he starts talking about, oh, well, this silly ass exercise. No, if you had just stuck with other stuff, I would have agreed. Had he said that, you know, if you got really strong on the weighted dip, even though it's not a competitive lift, your triceps and chest are going to get really big, I'd agree. If he said that the standing barbell press, if you got really strong on that your upper chest, your delts, your triceps, your traps will get big, I would agree. He's dead right. But he starts throwing in these silly ass exercises that put less muscle on you. Why would you do these? Not only do we have the issue of carryover, we have the issue of they don't put as much size on you. Anything that actually puts a size on you will have carryover. In other words, a standing press, if you put 50 pounds onto your 5 rep max on the standing press, your bench is going to go up by default because you've made the muscles bigger. Your delts and your triceps will grow from this. A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. That will have carryover. It's just not a movement pattern carryover. It's a hypertrophy carryover. And it will work. Same thing with a weighted dip. You increase your strength 30% on a weighted dip, even if you don't bench and then you go back and bench again and you relearn the movement pattern, your bench is going to go up. It's going to go up because the pecs, front delts, triceps all got bigger. The problem is he didn't use correct exercises. He threw in a bunch of silly ass exercises that will give you less total hypertrophy, particularly hypertrophy per unit of fatigue, and tried to use those as an example. So his points were valid until he started throwing in stupid ass exercises. That's where I disagree with the direction he went. And it's not me. Every expert in the field will look at that and say the same thing. The vast majority would. He started talking bullshit at that point. But the other points are valid. I just don't think that he knows the actual terminology. There are assistance movements and accessory movements. That's what we're talking about. For your personal primary exercises. And for you, because if you're not a competitive lifter, your primary exercise might be what you're doing to gain as much size as possible. And it might be a weighted pull-up, and I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that at all. But understand the way that these other things carry over to it does matter for the amount of size that you gain. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.